There's a very basic circuit, meaning neurons that exist in the skin, in the brain, and in the body that communicate with one another that allow you to heat up if you need to and cool down if you need to. You have this shell, which is basically skin, and within the skin you have neurons, nerve cells. Those nerve cells have channels or receptors on them. They're called trip channels. There are some other ones as well, which basically sense changes in heat. So if I were to put a hot object on your hand or your arm, those neurons would respond to that. They would send electrical signals into your spinal cord. And that's where the next station of this circuit resides. In your spinal cord, you've got a little cluster of neurons that exists at the top part of your spinal cord called the dorsal horn. The name again doesn't matter. And those neurons specifically relay heat information up to another area of your brain. Now here's where we get into some fancy names. It's the lateral parabrachial area. You don't need to know lateral parabrachial area, but it's a relay station. The lateral parabrachial area sends electrical signals to the POA. And I would like you to know POA. The POA stands for pre-optic area. Neurons in the pre-optic area basically reside over the roof of your mouth. These are neurons within the hypothalamus. And neurons in the pre-optic area have the ability to send signals out to the rest of your brain and body to get you to heat up and actually to change your behavior so that you heat up. Your POA, your pre-optic area, will actually change the way that you think and feel immediately. For instance, something warm contacts your skin or something very hot contacts your skin. The pre-optic area will send signals out to the endothelial cells, the blood vessels, both of the brain and body, that get them to dilate, right? To essentially increase their volume and their surface area in order to cast off heat. You will also start sweating. That sweating response is initiated not by the hot day or the hot sun, but by the pre-optic area neurons that send signals out to what's called the periphery of your body, and other chemicals are released, things like acetylcholine, that get you to sweat. If you happen to be shivering, neurons in the pre-optic area will make sure that you stop shivering. You're probably familiar with the feeling of being somewhat lethargic or spreading out your limbs on a hot day. Well, that is the result of neurons in your pre-optic area impacting your musculature to get you to increase your surface area so you can sweat off or release more heat. You can't just make yourself sweat on demand. Maybe you can through a set of stressful thoughts, but you can't just make yourself sweat. That is autonomic. It's below your conscious control. Things like vasodilation, the dilation of your veins in particular and capillaries in particular. And of course, there are these behavioral, somewhat voluntary aspects of dumping heat. And the lethargy, the kind of tiredness that we feel on a really hot day, that's also controlled by this circuit that I just described. If we're warm enough, we feel active and like we want to move around. If we're too warm, we feel like we need to stay put and spread out our limbs and dump heat. Pre-optic area also can send electrical signals to the amygdala, a brain area that is often talked about in the context of fear, but is really just a brain area that can activate your sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is part of your autonomic nervous system and is the one associated with fight or flight or with the stress response or even just the excited response, right? The sympathetic nervous system is also what gets activated when you're really excited about something. It tends to do that when you are suddenly in an environment that feels too hot, that you feel is risky levels of hot. If you ever have gotten into a sauna that was very, very hot, maybe 210 degrees Fahrenheit, you sit there for a minute, you'll notice that your heart rate increases. You often will feel the impulse to get out, especially if you stay in there for a little while. That impulse is the consequence of this pre-optic area communicating with your amygdala saying, hey, this environment is really hot and I'm trying to cool down and it's not really working. Now, later we'll talk about the advantage of pushing yourself a little bit through some of these very hot environments, provided you can do it safely. But The impulse to get yourself out of a very hot environment is the consequence of the POA communicating with your amygdala. And the amygdala then in turn activating your adrenal glands, which sit right above your kidneys, the release of adrenaline, and this feeling of agitation like you want to move. Usually you want to move out of whatever hot environment you happen to be in.
Annotated and summarized, easy to share with loved ones. The description below the title for this video has these summary points.